What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and this time we got round two with Aaron of My Dying Bride and the new kick-ass project, High Parasite. It is great to be able to talk with you. Thanks for returning to the show.
Hello, it's good to be back. How are you?
Doing excellent. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing quite well. I suffer a little bit from hay fever, and unfortunately, it's a rare occasion this in Yorkshire. The sun is shining, and everybody's mowing the grass, and my eyes are a little bit red today and a bit itchy. But I'm not really. I have no complaints, to be honest.
Well, it's the complete opposite here in New York. It is dark and cloudy outside, and I'm in the middle of the city, so there is no grass to cut. So,
Okay.
nothing like a little bit of contrast. Just as much
Yeah,
contrast in this
yeah.
interview as there is with your music. But it's so awesome to be able to talk with you because you've had a fairly busy year between the new My Dying Bride album being released this year, but we also the newest elephant in the room, if you say, we got the debut of High Parasite with Forever We Burn. With the making of this album, was this sort of like a vision that you had in the back of your mind for a while, or was this sort of like a spur of the moment idea?
Well, it had nothing to do with me. Our guitar tech, Danny Toombs, unbeknownst to me, was writing music on his laptop. And I got an email one day from him with a song attached, and he said, Aaron, I can't do death metal vocals. Would you mind doing some death metal vocals on this song of mine? And I had a listen and I thought, oh, this is great. Yeah, of course I can. He had already done some clean vocals. So I did some death metal and I returned it, and we both loved it, and it was great. And then another couple of songs came, and I thought, great, this is really good. I quite like what you're doing here. And he played all the instruments and wrote all the music. And then he said, I think I'm going to put a band together. And I said, well, good luck with that. And then a few weeks later, he said, I've got a band. We're going to go to Manchester and record a 4-song demo. Can you make it? I said, yeah, it's only an hour's drive. It's Saturday, Sunday, no problem at all. So I went over, I met these guys who I'd never met before. And I did some death metaling, and it went really well, actually. Really nice people. And then, the demo went out into the world of record labels, and Spine Farm got in touch. Well, in fact, to be honest, loads of labels got in touch, which was amazing. Danny always had his eye on Spine Farm, so we just went with Spine Farm because it's very much his. I've become part of it, but it was very much his vehicle. And while we were recording the album, the boss of Spine Farm, Dante, was there. Greg from Paradise Lost was there because he was producing, and a conversation arose where someone asked me, am I actually in the band? And we just all kind of looked at each other, and I said, I think I might be in the band.
And
And everyone just sort of said, yeah, probably then.
and now you're stuck.
And that was it.
And now you're stuck doing all the interviews for the band, right?
And then now I'm doing all the bloody press. So it wasn't. I didn't start it. It just arrived because a friend of mine wanted some help, and it kind of evolved from that, really. And at no point did I say, "Can I be in your band?" And at no point did they say, "Will you be in our band?" It just happened, and here I am doing dual vocals with Danny Toombs, and it's great.
Did you go into this with like a different creative mindset? Because like you've done a lot of guest work before, as we've seen with artists such as December Noir and God Rhythm and Gospel of Decay, and which that EP just came out this year. So you've been quite promiscuous in the world of bands, if you will. So between My Dying Bride being your baby, now collaborating with High Parasite and all this stuff, does the creative mindset change depending on what project you're involved with? Or being that you have such a signature voice where I could tell that it's you, there is sort of like a typical method behind the madness of your creativity?
It does differ from project to project because there are some things where people, they're not really interested in the singing or the screaming and shouting. They'd like some narration, please. And so they will supply, well, I mean, sometimes they supply the words and sometimes they don't. They just say, Aaron, there's a piece of music between 3 minutes 15 and 5 minutes 12. Can you do some narration and make your own words up? So sometimes I do that. And narration is my favorite because I'm quite good at it. And you don't have to be pitch perfect so long as your delivery is concise and clear. and has a bit of feeling, you can pretty much get away with it. And then, you get people who just want to scream as loud as you can, Aaron, just scream as loud as you can. And that's great as well, because you can just let go. And sometimes, I'm amazed I can still do death metal vocals. I've been doing it for 34 years. But it's great fun to do. So it's a fantastic way of venting any anger or frustration that you may or may not have known was building up inside you. So that's always good to do. And the trickiest stuff, because I'm not the best singer in the world, is when people say, "Oh, Aaron, we want some lovely, clean vocals, and here are the lyrics." So I prefer to write my own lyrics, but obviously, if it's somebody else's project, they've written their own lyrics, and they'd like me to sing along, and I sing along, and then you get the email back. "Oh, we weren't quite expecting that." And you think, "Oh God, do I have to redo it?" But they quite like what they've got. And
my anxiety levels go so up when somebody says, "I was not expecting that." I'm like, I hope you mean that in a good way and not in a terrible way.
Exactly. Because sometimes you think, "Oh God, are we going to go back and forth 20 times now?" Because I'm not pitch perfect, and I've never sold myself as a singer. I believe a singer can get within their range, can get all the notes required, whereas a vocalist does what they have to do to sound good along with the music. And I cite people like Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger. They're not the best singers in the world, but they're amazing vocalists because they've got a certain style about their delivery of words, and it's the words are more important than being pitch perfect. And I put myself rudely in amongst those people, but I enjoy doing it, and if I can't reach the notes, to me it doesn't really matter. If it's the words that count and the passion within the delivery.
Yeah, well, having such a eclectic voice, like the melodic vocals in a track such as For You, for example, I get goosebumps every time you lead me into that. But like when you move into the heavier aspects that we see in My Dying Bride, especially like the earlier stuff that we've gotten off of like Turn Loose the Swans or even As the Flower Withers, like having such a eclectic use of your voice, does it express a different side of you if you're doing something more melodic versus something more aggressive? Is it a different side of Aaron that we're seeing or hearing?
Yeah, definitely. In the early days, I used to death metal over everything, which was just what I did, and it's because I wasn't sure if I could sing, and it's a shame really, because I look back at it and I look at some of the words that I've written and I'm really proud of them, but no one can make them out because I'm screaming my head off, and so I realised over time, I'd like it if people could hear what I was saying. So there were moments where, when the music wasn't quite as frantic, I thought to myself, well, I want people to hear these words, so I'm going to sing them rather than death metal them. And that was it. The decision was made because I wanted people to hear what I had to say. And when the music ramped up in tempo again, the screaming and shouting began, which was great because the tempo drove that kind of style of vocal. And over the years, I have learned, you don't have to scream and shout over everything. If the required piece of music is pleasant enough, you can sing on it or narrate on it or even whisper. I try and keep a good variety of deliveries because I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. Not only will I get bored, everyone else listening will get bored. There are some vocalists, I'm not going to mention names, obviously. You listen to their albums, and they're just doing the same thing on every single song.
Yeah.
And I think, well, okay, that's fine if that's your cup of tea. But for me, I need variety.
Yeah.
So I'll do anything from whispering to talking to singing, death metal, even to the point where it's almost black metal. There are moments on High Parasite, the final song, I think. We Break, We Die, where I'm really giving it the full black metal screaming. And in fact, in production, we tried to get more of a cassette tape, old 1980s black metal sound to it. So it sounds really rough and screechy, but it's great. I like to have variety. Well, who doesn't?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the band. Like, for instance, I wouldn't want Corpse Grinder from Cannibal Corpse doing any clean singing on a Cannibal Corpse album, or John Tardy from Obituary. But I think a band like My Dying Bride, and not even in your genre, but Deftones, for example, I love it when Chino is doing his variety. You know, Faith No More, Mike Patton goes all along the spectrum. So I think it really depends on the band and the variety. I've always thought what was great about My Dying Bride is that regardless of what usage of your voice, it was atmospheric and really immersing us into an alternate reality of emotion that wasn't there from the initial beginning. And on top of that, it really has the ability, for instance, I personally think that actually The Ghosts of Orion is the best My Dying Bride album. I think that 2020 album was the nail in the coffin of what makes My Dying Bride, because of the personal aspects on it, the deteriorating nature, and the love that is just behind the voice of despair. Depending on what you're singing about, though, depending on the lyrical context as well, does it maybe resonate with you differently depending on what you're singing about? Does it feel like you channel a different energy if it's more personal, like what The Ghosts of Orion was about, or if it's like sort of more conceptually based, like 34-7-8 Complete or something like that?
Yeah, things do change depending on the mood and the mood of the music. When generally the music comes first, and when it arrives at my house, I will listen to it over and over again. And if it is quite an emotional piece, then I will write emotional lyrics to go along with that. And quite often they might be personal. And if they're too personal, sometimes I may write them in a more fragrant, poetic fashion, so that you don't immediately on first reading get it. But if you're willing to put the time in, you can read between the lines and you'll understand that I'm speaking from my heart. There are times when I do, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and those songs are particularly difficult to sing live. And I quite often, when we're picking songs to play live for My Dying Bride, I choose to not include those songs because I'll end up just crying all the way through the show, and it'll be a horrible display for everybody. And again, if a piece of music arrives and it's pretty frantic and it's, the tempo's up really up there and the guitars are crushing, and then that's more likely going to draw from me more a narrative that is more fantastical, a story that I will make up. I will generate characters who sometimes will go through a story, a start, a middle, and an end, and something for people to follow. And I won't bother disguising it in any kind of flamboyant fashion. It's just a story, and you can get involved with the characters and see where they're going. I mean, the Barchester Whitby, probably the longest song we've ever done, it follows the story of a massive dog who hunts down the victims who killed his master. There's no hidden stories behind that. It is what it is. It's like a Sherlock Holmes piece. And others are written in a much more abstract fashion, just because as a writer, and it sounds awful to say it, but as a poet, I sometimes like to write in a way where I feel I want the reader to be challenged a little bit more with this, and not to get it straight away. And I enjoy using words in various fashions to confuse and misdirect sometimes. And, we've seen reviews of literally every song I've ever written. And some people get it right, some people get it wildly wrong, and some people take it on a completely different tangent, which was better than my original idea. And I kind of wish I'd have gone down that route. That's so clever.
Yeah.
And, we've had people from, several people saying, I've taken your lyrics into school and asked my teacher, and they were part of a study I was doing, and that's amazing. I never imagined anything like that. But the words go along with the music. If there's a racket going on at 100 miles an hour, it's extremely unlikely I'm going to deliver some emotional words.
I think, they say that depression or just negative emotions in general can shut down the mind, which there is some truth to that. But I think the dark emotions that are expressed in My Dying Bride, or just in your voice in general, is the type of darkness that could open up the mind, which I think is a really unique way of putting it. It goes to show that sometimes the darkest aspects of life do manage to teach us. I think it's one thing there is music that teaches you to conquer your demons or relinquish your demons, but I think sometimes it's to almost make art with the demons, or make peace with your demons in a way, which is expressed in My Dying Bride and High
Yeah,
Parasite.
I think it's important to do because we all bottle up our emotions from time to time, and some people don't have an outlet. Their head becomes more and more filled with all these crazy ideas, and they end up turning to drugs or medication of some description, which is terrible. But for me, I'm lucky; I do have an outlet. Whatever's going on in my head, if it's negative, I will put pen to paper and I will write something. Not necessarily what's in my head, but whatever I write, I can. It's like a valve being loosened. I can feel the steam and the pressure dispersing. And when I'm writing, I've no idea if they're going to become lyrics for a band or if it's going to be a poem. I just write and write and write until I feel like I've said what I needed to say for clarity within my own mind. And yeah, sometimes a few days later, you look back at what you've written and you think, "Wow, I was messed up right then." That's my medication. That's it's cathartic, and it's a way of just taking all that negative energy, which ruins some people, and putting it into something which may or may not be productive, but it's certainly creative. And at some point, someone somewhere else in the world might read it and be aware that, well, I was a bit like that, and that's really helped.
Well, I also think that a band's catalog is a great representation of how time is relative. Like, I was a late bloomer with My Dying Bride, right? Like, I didn't discover My Dying Bride. I believe A Map of All Our Failures was my first My Dying Bride, or at least how I discovered you. So when I go back and listen, like, if I listen to As the Flowers Withers, like, I'm not saying, oh, this takes me back to 1992. I was -1 at that time. So, like, it takes me back to 2012 when I listen to it, and same thing for Lies I Sire. Like, that takes me back to 2012, or The Dreadful Hours. Like, it takes me back to that time period. So I think in the end, when you put the album out, it is a staple in time for, it's a representative of who you were when you released that album. But it's going to be representative for somebody else in a different time period.
Yeah, of course it is. And we've been around for such a long time now that we're lucky enough we've spanned over 3 decades. And, and that's great, because when you perform live, you walk out on stage. Before my character takes me over and I no longer can see the audience, when you first walk out, you can see there's kids and there's people with grey hair. And it's great. The grey-haired ones generally have been with you for quite some time, but it's great that the kids are there as well. It means we're still relevant. Some people still think a band that's been going for 3 decades is still relevant, and I think that's absolutely great. And people discover, when you've been around this long, people discover you all the time. With every album, people discover you, and with every album, you lose some fans because they listen and they go, "No, it's not as good as they used to be. They've lost their way." But that's exactly the same with everybody. I mean, you look recently at was it Stranger Things, Kate Bush, and suddenly a whole new generation of kids are loving Kate Bush, and for them, when they're old, when they think of that Kate Bush song, they're not going back to the 70s or the 80s when it was released. They weren't even born. So it's when you discover something, that's when it takes you back.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's what I think is amazing about it. And yeah, like, I think it represents growth, and it represents change, and it represents, change being the hardest aspect of life that we have to deal with. I think in the end, when multiple people, what I wanted to say is, I think you have, I got to quote the AC/DC documentary, with My Dying Bride, it's the same thing. Before it was saying lock up your daughters, now it's lock up your mothers. So, but
well, I'll take that. Alex. Thanks.
No problem. Any opportunity I have. That's one of my favorite quotes I heard in a music documentary ever. Rest in peace to Malcolm Young. A couple more questions I wanted to ask you is because I've always said that when darkness is sort of like the fuel to your fire. I mean, it makes great fuel for creativity. But I've also said that we as artists could sometimes become victimized by our own product sometimes. And with what you've had to express, because I know that The Ghost of Orion was a very personal album relating to a lot of struggles, which I'm not going to bring up unless you'd like to, but like, so when you have to use your own personal trials and tribulations, or just, darkness in general as a fuel to your fire, does that maybe make the songwriting process just as deteriorating as it can be cathartic?
Yeah, it's difficult. The process for that album was particularly difficult. It is hard to write about very personal things, and so thankfully we quite often don't need to. For the most point, we don't need to, which is great. And then when you do, it's hard work, and yeah, you're not sure if everyone else is going to go along with it, and they might just say, "Oh, really?" And so it's a difficult question you've got to ask yourself. I mean, I could have turned the whole of the Ghost of Orion album into a personal thing. Every song, it could have been relentless and been the most melancholic, grief-stricken record the world has ever seen. But I would never listen to it, and I would never want to talk about it. I would never do the press because I wouldn't want to speak about it. And so I wasn't prepared to do that. Obviously there's a couple of moments in there which are very obvious, and I needed that to get that out of my system. And yeah, a lot of people say, "Oh, yeah, that was blah blah blah. That was a terrible time," and what have you. But I've never. I try not to read reviews about any of our albums. I did at the beginning because we were super excited. And then when you've read 50, you don't bother reading them anymore. But friends and family pull out the good ones and show you the good ones. My Dying Bride have been fortunate. We've had very, very few negative reviews, which is absolutely fantastic. Because on the odd occasion when you do get one and you read it, you kind of think, yeah, well, what do they know? But deep inside, it hurts. And so
Absolutely.
clearly I was never going to read any reviews of The Ghost of Orion because I didn't want people to poke fun at it. Even if they don't know the background, even if they don't like it, I didn't want to read about people saying this is the worst shit I've ever heard. So I saw no reviews of that album, and I can live with that.
I mean, any artist who says that they don't care at all of what the reviews are is lying to you. And I'm not saying, and by no means am I saying you should always accommodate to what the majority feels, or you should no. In the end, you got to do what's right for you. But if you really do not give a shit about people's perception at all, whether they love it or hate it, you would not be putting it out into the world. You would just be creating the art for yourself. I made thousands of paintings that are not on my social media that I didn't exhibit because I just made them for myself. I don't feel the need to share it. It was satisfactory for myself. So in the end, if an artist says, as they're doing press or they state or whatever, I put this album out, I don't give a shit what people think of it, they are lying to you. They are lying to you.
Yeah, of course. You put so much work into it. It's of course you care. I mean, I've been writing poems for as long as I've been writing lyrics, and they've never been in a book. They've never been anywhere. And it was only very recently. God, was it this year or last year? God, I can't remember. I was invited by, it was Record Store Day, and there was a record store in Liverpool, and they were aware that I'd written some poems, and they said, "Do you mind, would you come along on the release of the new My Dying Bride album and read some poems?" And I thought, okay, well, no one's ever even read them before. And I wasn't going to do it, but they sent a very sensitive email, and I kind of thought, well, do you know what? Okay, why not? So I dragged all these scraps of paper because I'd never documented them before. I just wrote on any old shit and put it in a drawer because that's what I wanted to do. So I typed a few of them up and printed them out, and I went along, and I was really nervous because I'd never even spoken them. I'd written them, but I'd never spoken them aloud. So I didn't even know how they were going to come across orally. So I stood there with a microphone with all these people, and I just read the words, and there were tears and laughter, and it felt amazing. And I kind of thought to myself, well, that's exactly the kind of response I wanted. And it not that I was looking for justification, but it was almost like that's what that's what you needed. That's what helps you through life. Things like that. And there was a guy there who thought it was so great. He's booked me into a cathedral in Belgium on the 25th of January to read more of my poems, along with some great musicians, Mark Deeks from Arth and Joe Quayle, the electric cello player who featured on my Dying Brides album. So, from keeping my poems stuck in a drawer for over 30 years, seemingly as soon as I get them out, everybody wants to hear them, and it's like, well, suddenly it's a new string to my bow. I didn't realize I had, because they were just for me, and now other people want them, and I'm happy to share them. Of course, there's going to be some in there which I can't read out. There is talk now of a book, which is nice, but again, if I'd wanted a book out, I wouldn't have waited 30 years to do it. I would have pulled my finger out by now. So it was never intended as a book. But someone suggested, well, look, I saw the video of you reading your poems. Can we print them? Can we publish them? And I just thought, why not? They're already written. Let's do it. So there are things coming in a poetry sense, which I never expected, but it seems to be quite nice.
I mean, first off, fans are going to want everything from their favorite artists, okay? Like poems, lyrics, their blood test results. The fans are going to want it all. But I think that's amazing that you're able to express yourself through words in multiple ways. Words are hard. Like I learned from a teacher of mine that we as human beings, we're not naturally meant to write and read. Like it's not in our natural ingrained instinct. We're meant to hunt and survive. So yeah, to I wasn't going to say the other thing because this is YouTube we're dealing with, but I think to have these words that you express lyrically, to poetically, and all these different mediums, it's a great means. You mastered the art of words. And I think that alone is a very difficult task. There are great lyric writers, but I've interviewed, you could probably find them on this channel, I've interviewed plenty of artists who are fantastic lyricists, fantastic lyrics. They do an interview and they need to explain it. It's, you'd be amazed on how flat it falls. So I think,
really?
Yeah, so I think just talking to you right now and you giving me these answers too, have been excellent. I was like, you are great with words.
Well, I've always enjoyed words because when I was at school, and I think people might understand this, I was terrible with numbers. And weirdly, the way my brain seems to work, numbers, you can wait over there somewhere, guys. We're not really interested in you. Words, come along, we love you. So when I was at school, I was in like the super brainy class for English literature. And I loved it, and I absorbed all of the poetry and all of the great poets, and I absolutely loved it. And sometimes you get to that point where the teacher, you're all reading the same book, and the teacher will pick someone and say, Simon, will you read the next passage? And they stumble their way through it because they're embarrassed, because they're kids and there's other kids listening, and it's poems. Sometimes the words are quite flamboyant and difficult to understand. And I'm thinking, pick me next. And then when the teacher picked me, I was the only one who stood up in the class, and I read them out, and I read them with passion, and I was gesticulating with my arms, and people must have thought I was insane, but I felt that was how you do it. You can look at the words. This is how you do it. And then I would leave that class and immediately go to the lowest level in mathematics, where all the knuckle draggers are, and I just struggled. I struggled with all the numbers. Don't mean anything to me, and so my brain has compensated for that by rewarding me with being able to manipulate words in a fashion that seems to be quite desirable to a lot of people.
Does that make 34.78% complete your least favorite album?
Yeah. I mean, that was a bizarre moment when we came up with that. But again, with that album, I think if we'd given it a more traditional album cover artwork and a different album title, people would have accepted it more broadly. But because we gave it that title and the weird artwork, people were immediately put off by it. And everyone was talking about the song Heroin Chic. And they thought, okay, My Dying Bride have lost their way completely with this album. And it's only later on, years and years later, when people decided to go back and test the water and realize actually it's not as bizarre as we thought it was. And it's become a much more welcoming record to people's collections these days than it certainly was upon release.
That happens all the time. I know people who love Saint Anger now and were fucking shitting on it 20 years ago. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happens all the time. But
Yeah, of course it does.
before we go, I want to thank you as always for not only just an amazing conversation and for your time, but thank you as always for the music that you continue to bring to us with My Dying Bride and now High Parasite. This record is awesome. Is there just anything else you'd like to promote for new releases or upcoming shows that you'd like to promote?
Well, I mean, we are on tour with Cradle of Filth in October and November, only in the UK. But you know, we're Toombs, the main songwriter in High Parasite, is also, did I mention it, Greg McIntosh's guitar tech.
Oh, wow.
And people are saying, you know, are we going to see High Parasite in the US? And I'm thinking, well, Paradise Lost are always in the US. They're our best friends. Let's go to America and Canada and everywhere else with Paradise Lost. So fingers crossed, we're going to try and work something out. And I think it would be lovely if the first time we come over, it's with our mates PL. So fingers crossed for that. But nothing is sorted yet. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's helped support High Parasite and My Dying Bride over the years. It's greatly appreciated. It does not go over our heads. We respect everything. And people like yourselves, you're giving up your time to spend time with us. And your time is limited, as mine is. Really appreciate you for this moment.
Our time is limited, but you make the time. Our time is limited, so we want to use that time wisely, and the wise way to do it is to invest in your music. So, thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Alex.
Anytime. Everybody, we are here with Aaron of My Dying Bride and High Parasite. Be sure to check out the debut High Parasite album. It is absolutely kick-ass. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.
Cheers, everybody.